The Midnight Masquerade, a sleep story. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday evening, slipped beneath your door while you were making tea in the kitchen. You discovered it when you returned to your living room, drawn by the faint scent of roses and something darker, something like old parchment and midnight air. The envelope was heavy, made of paper so thick and luxurious it felt like fabric between your fingers. Deep burgundy in color, sealed with black wax that bore the imprint of a rose intertwined with thorns. Your name was written across the front in silver ink, the letters flowing and elegant, as though penned by someone from another century. You sat down slowly in your favorite chair by the window, the one that overlooked the quiet street below, now painted in shades of dusk. The street lamps were just beginning to flicker to life, casting pools of golden light onto the sidewalk. You turned the envelope over in your hands, feeling its weight, its promise of mystery. When you broke the seal, the wax gave way with a satisfying crack, releasing that scent again. Roses and something indefinable, something that made you think of moonlight on water, of silk against bare skin, of secrets whispered in darkened hallways. The card inside was even more beautiful than the envelope, cream-colored, bordered in deep gold, with those same elegant silver letters dancing across its surface. "You are cordially invited," it read, "to the Midnight Masquerade, a gathering of kindred spirits beneath the dark moon. Saturday next, at the stroke of midnight, the old Ashford estate on Thornhill Road. Come as you are, but wear your mask. We have been waiting for you." There was no signature, no return address, no explanation of who had sent it or why. But as you held the invitation in your hands, as the last light of day faded from your windows and the room around you grew dim, you felt something stir within you, something you hadn't felt in years, a sense of anticipation, of possibility, of doors about to open onto rooms you'd never seen before. You had heard of the Ashford estate, of course. Everyone in town had. It sat at the end of Thornhill Road, behind tall iron gates that were always locked, surrounded by ancient oak trees whose branches seemed to reach toward the house like gnarled fingers. The estate had been empty for as long as you could remember, though rumors persisted that someone, or something, still lived there, hidden behind those dark windows and heavy curtains. People whispered about the Ashford family, about their strange habits and stranger guests, about parties that lasted until dawn and beyond, about music that could be heard drifting through the trees on certain nights when the moon was dark. But these were old stories, passed down from grandparents to parents to children, worn smooth with retelling like stones in a river. No one really believed them anymore. And yet here you sat, with an invitation to the very place those stories warned about, and you knew without question that you would go. How could you not? In the midst of your ordinary life, with its ordinary routines and ordinary days, here was something extraordinary. Here was mystery. Here was the unknown. The days between Tuesday and Saturday seemed to stretch like taffy, each hour longer than the last. You went about your normal activities, work, errands, the quiet rhythms of daily life. But your mind kept returning to that invitation, to the promise it held. You thought about what you might wear, what kind of mask you would need, what you might find when you arrived at those iron gates. On Thursday, you went to a small boutique on the other side of town, tucked away on a street you rarely visited. The shop was dimly lit, filled with vintage clothing that smelled of lavender and cedar. The woman behind the counter was ancient, or so she seemed, with silver hair piled high on her head and eyes that looked at you with knowing. "I need something for a masquerade," you told her, and those knowing eyes crinkled at the corners. "Ah," she said, as though she'd been expecting you. "Yes, I think I have just the thing." She led you to the back of the shop, where the shadows were deeper and the air seemed cooler. From a wardrobe that looked like it belonged in a castle, she pulled out a dress that made your breath catch in your throat. It was the color of midnight, that particular shade of blue-black that the sky turns at the darkest hour. Velvet, heavy and soft, with long sleeves that would hug your arms and a neckline that dipped low, but not too low, elegant rather than revealing. The skirt was full, the kind that would swish when you walked, and when the woman held it up to the dim light, you could see that tiny crystals had been sewn throughout the fabric, so that it seemed to shimmer like stars. "It's perfect," you whispered, and the old woman smiled. "I made it many years ago," she said softly, "for someone who never came to claim it. I think it was waiting for you." You tried it on in the small dressing room, behind a curtain that looked like it had been there for decades. The dress fit as though it had been made for your body specifically, hugging you in all the right places, flowing in all the others. When you looked at yourself in the tarnished mirror, you almost didn't recognize the woman looking back. She looked mysterious, romantic, like someone from another time, like someone who belonged at a midnight masquerade. "And you'll need this," the old woman said when you emerged from the dressing room. She held out a mask, and you took it with careful hands. It was made of black lace over a foundation of stiffened silk, shaped to cover the upper half of your face, with openings for your eyes. Small black feathers decorated one side, and more of those tiny crystals caught the light. Ribbons of black satin trailed from either side, to be tied at the back of your head. "How much?" you asked, but the old woman shook her head. "Consider it a gift," she said, "for kindred spirits." That phrase again, the same words that had been on the invitation. You looked at her sharply, but she had already turned away, shuffling back toward the front of the shop, leaving you standing there with the dress and mask in your arms and questions on your lips that went unspoken. You took them home and hung the dress in your closet, where it seemed to absorb what little light came through your bedroom window. The mask you placed on your dresser, where you could look at it as you went about your evening routine. It seemed to watch you back, those empty eye holes holding promises of transformation, of becoming someone or something else. Saturday arrived at last, bringing with it a strange restlessness that made it impossible to focus on anything. You tried to read but couldn't concentrate on the words. You tried to watch television but found yourself staring through the screen rather than at it. You made lunch but barely tasted it, made dinner but left it half-eaten on your plate. As evening fell, you drew a bath, pouring in salts that smelled of jasmine and roses. You lit candles around the tub, turned off the overhead light, and sank into the warm water with a sigh that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside you. The heat seeped into your muscles, loosening tensions you hadn't known you were carrying, while the candlelight flickered and danced across the ceiling. You thought about the masquerade as you bathed, imagining what it might be like. You pictured grand ballrooms lit by chandeliers, masked figures swirling across polished floors, music that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. You pictured yourself among them, anonymous behind your mask, free to be whoever you wanted to be, free from the weight of your everyday identity. After your bath, you took your time getting ready. You dried your hair and styled it simply, pulling it back from your face so the mask would sit properly. You applied makeup with a careful hand, dark around the eyes to emphasize them behind the mask, a deep red on your lips that looked almost black in certain lights. Then you slipped into the dress, feeling the velvet slide over your skin like cool water. It was heavy, substantial, the kind of garment that changed the way you moved, that made you stand straighter, walk more slowly, carry yourself with a different kind of grace. You fastened the buttons that ran up the back as far as you could reach, then used a long-handled hook to fasten the rest. The mask came next, settled over your face and tied securely at the back of your head. Looking in the mirror, you saw that transformation you'd imagined. The woman looking back at you was familiar, but not quite, known but unknown. She was beautiful in a way you didn't usually see yourself, mysterious and alluring and just a little bit dangerous. You chose simple shoes with low heels. You would need to walk, after all, and a velvet cloak to keep you warm. It was nearly 11 when you finally left your apartment, locking the door behind you and descending the stairs to the street below. The night was cool but not cold, perfect for walking. The air smelled clean, washed by a rain that had fallen earlier in the day. The moon was dark, just as the invitation had promised, leaving the sky full of stars that seemed unusually bright. You could see them between the street lamps, glittering like the crystals on your dress. You walked through the familiar streets of your neighborhood, your footsteps echoing in the quiet. Most people were inside at this hour, warm behind lit windows, watching television or reading or preparing for bed. You felt like a ghost moving through their world, invisible and separate, on your way to something they couldn't see or understand. As you walked, you became aware of others on the streets as well. Not many, just a few here and there, all moving in the same direction you were. A man in a dark suit with a silver mask shaped like a wolf's face. A woman in deep purple with a mask of peacock feathers. A couple walking hand in hand, both masked, both dressed in shades of crimson. None of you spoke. None of you acknowledged each other beyond small nods of recognition. But you all moved together like a river flowing toward the same destination, drawn by the same mysterious pull. Thornhill Road began at the edge of town, where the street lamps grew fewer and the houses spread farther apart. The pavement gave way to cobblestones, old and uneven, that made you watch your step. Trees grew thicker here, their branches meeting overhead to form a natural tunnel that blocked out the stars. You could feel your heart beating faster as you walked, anticipation building with every step. The others were still around you, shadows moving through shadows, the soft rustle of fabric and quiet footfalls the only sounds in the darkness. Then ahead, through the trees, you saw lights. Not the harsh electric lights of the modern world, but softer, warmer lights. Lanterns, you realized as you drew closer. Dozens of lanterns hanging from the branches of the trees, casting a golden glow that lit the path ahead. The iron gates of the Ashford estate stood open, which was somehow more unsettling than finding them locked. They were old and ornate, worked into patterns of roses and thorns, the metal black and smooth from decades of wind and rain. Beyond them, the driveway curved away through more trees, and at the end of that curve, you could just glimpse the house itself. The Ashford estate was larger than you'd imagined. 3 stories of dark stone that seemed to absorb the lantern light rather than reflect it. Windows glowed from within, and you could see shadows moving behind the glass. The architecture was old, Victorian perhaps, with towers and turrets and balconies that jutted out at odd angles. It looked like the kind of house that would have secret passages and hidden rooms, the kind of house where anything might be possible. As you passed through the gates, you noticed a figure standing just inside, beside the driveway. Tall and still, dressed all in black, wearing a mask that covered the entire face. No features visible, just smooth black material with a subtle shimmer to it. The figure inclined its head as you passed, a gesture that seemed both welcoming and warning at once. The driveway was longer than it had looked from the gates. You walked for what felt like several minutes, your shoes crunching on the gravel, the lights of the house growing closer and brighter with every step. Other guests moved around you, some ahead, some behind, all silent, all focused on the destination ahead. Music reached you before you reached the house. Soft at first, almost inaudible beneath the sound of your own breathing and footsteps. But it grew steadily louder as you approached, until you could make out individual instruments, violins and cellos, a piano, perhaps a harp. The music was slow and haunting, beautiful in a melancholy way, the kind of music that made you think of autumn leaves falling and long-ago love affairs. The front entrance of the house was enormous, 2 massive doors of dark wood standing open to the night. More lanterns flanked the entrance, and more of those still black masked figures stood on either side, silent sentinels watching as guests arrived. You climbed the steps slowly, feeling the weight of the house above you, the weight of the night around you. As you reached the top step and crossed the threshold into the Ashford estate, you felt a change in the air. It was warmer inside, but that wasn't quite it. The air felt thicker somehow, heavier, charged with something you couldn't name. Magic, maybe, or just possibility. The sense that the normal rules of the world outside might not apply within these walls. The entrance hall took your breath away. It was vast, with the ceiling so high it disappeared into shadows above. A chandelier hung in the center of the space, massive and glittering with what must have been 1,000 candles. The floor was marble, polished to a mirror shine, reflecting the candlelight so that it seemed as though you were standing on captured stars. Walls of dark wood paneling rose on either side, decorated with paintings in heavy gilt frames, portraits of serious-faced men and women in old-fashioned clothing, landscapes of forests and mountains beneath stormy skies, still lives of flowers that looked almost alive in the flickering light. A grand staircase curved up from the center of the hall, splitting into 2 branches that led to the floors above. The banister was carved wood, every inch of it decorated with those same roses and thorns that had adorned the gates outside. Guests were ascending the stairs, their colorful costumes bright against the dark wood, their masks hiding their identities. You followed them up, your hand gliding along the smooth banister, your feet silent on the carpeted steps. At the top, the staircase opened onto a wide gallery that ran the length of the house. More paintings hung here, interspersed with tall windows that looked out onto the grounds. Through one window, you caught a glimpse of gardens below, lit by more of those golden lanterns, with paths winding between carefully sculpted hedges. But it was the ballroom that drew you. Its entrance at the center of the gallery, doors thrown wide to reveal the space beyond. You moved toward it as though pulled by an invisible string, drawn by the music that swelled and echoed, by the sight of masked figures moving within, by something deeper and more primal that you couldn't name. The ballroom was magnificent, easily the size of your entire apartment, perhaps larger, with more of those impossibly high ceilings and more of those glittering chandeliers. The walls were covered in silk wallpaper of deep burgundy, patterned with gold. Tall mirrors in ornate frames hung at intervals, reflecting the light and the guests, making the room seem even larger than it was. But it was the people, the guests, that truly made the scene magical. There must have been 100 of them, maybe more, all dressed in finery that ranged from elegant to elaborate. Gowns of silk and satin and velvet in every color imaginable, deep jewel tones of ruby and sapphire and emerald, soft pastels of rose and lavender and cream, stark blacks and whites and golds, and all of them masked. Some wore simple domino masks like yours, covering just the eyes. Others wore full-face masks shaped like animals or mythical creatures or abstract designs. Some were decorated with feathers or jewels or flowers. Some were beautiful, some were grotesque, some were both at once. The guests moved through the ballroom in a slow, dreamlike way, some dancing to the music, others conversing in quiet groups, still others standing alone and watching. Waiters circulated through the crowd carrying trays, some with crystal flutes of champagne, others with small plates of delicacies that looked almost too beautiful to eat. You accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter, one of those silent figures in black masks. The crystal was cold against your fingers, and when you sipped, the champagne was perfect, dry and crisp with just a hint of something sweet, something that might have been roses or might have been something else entirely. As you moved into the ballroom, the music seemed to wrap around you like a physical thing. The orchestra was positioned at the far end of the room, on a raised dais draped in black velvet. You counted perhaps a dozen musicians, all dressed in black, all masked, their instruments gleaming in the candlelight. The music they played was unlike anything you'd heard before. Classical in structure, but with something else woven through it, something darker and more mysterious. It made you want to move, to sway, to dance. Beautiful, isn't it? A voice said beside you, and you turned to find a man standing there. He was tall and lean, dressed in a suit of charcoal gray that fit him perfectly. His mask was simple silver, covering the upper half of his face, with no decoration except the metallic gleam itself. Behind the mask, his eyes were dark, so dark they seemed almost black in the candlelight. The music, you asked, and he smiled. His lips were the only part of his face you could clearly see, and they curved in a way that was both inviting and enigmatic. The music, yes, he said, but also this, all of this, the night, the gathering, the sense that anything might happen. You nodded slowly. I've never been to anything like this before. Few have, he said. The midnight masquerade is something special, something rare. It only happens once a year, and only certain people are invited. How are they chosen, you asked? The people who are invited, His smile deepened. That's one of the mysteries, isn't it? Some say the invitations find those who need them most, those who are searching for something, even if they don't know what. Those who are ready for something different, something more. And what do you think? You asked, emboldened by the champagne and the anonymity of your mask. I think, he said slowly, that we all have a place we're meant to be at certain times in our lives. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, we receive an invitation that shows us the way to that place. Before you could respond, he extended his hand. Would you like to dance? You looked at his hand for a moment, long fingers, pale skin. And then you placed your hand in his. His fingers closed around yours, warm and firm, and he led you onto the dance floor. The music shifted as you began to move, slowing into a waltz. The man, you didn't even know his name, and somehow that seemed appropriate, pulled you close, one hand on your waist, the other holding yours. You placed your free hand on his shoulder and let him guide you into the steps. You'd learned to waltz years ago, in a different life it seemed, but your body remembered the rhythm. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Turning and turning across the polished floor. Around you, other couples moved in the same pattern, a sea of masked faces and swirling fabric, all moving together as though choreographed by some unseen hand. You dance well, your partner said, his voice low, meant only for you despite the music and the crowd around you. So do you replied, and he laughed softly. I've had a lot of practice. Many years of nights like this. Many dances in rooms like this. Many years, you asked. You talk as though you've been coming to these masquerades for a long time. But I thought this was rare once a year. His dark eyes glittered behind his mask. Time is strange in places like this, he said. A single night can contain multitudes. And some of us have learned to make the most of every moment. You weren't entirely sure what he meant by that. But before you could ask, the waltz ended and a new piece began. This one was faster, more energetic, and your partner released you with a small bow. Perhaps we'll dance again later, he said, and then he melted back into the crowd, leaving you standing alone on the dance floor. You moved to the edge of the room, wanting to catch your breath and observe for a moment. Your heart was beating fast from the dancing and from something else. The strangeness of the entire evening, the surreal quality of finding yourself here, in this house, at this party, surrounded by masked strangers. The champagne in your glass was still cold, and you sipped it again, slower this time, savoring it. As you stood there, you began to notice details you'd missed before. The way the candlelight seemed to pulse in time with the music, growing brighter on the high notes and dimmer on the low ones. The way the mirrors on the walls reflected not quite what they should. Sometimes you'd see a guest back in the mirror when they were facing toward it, or see their reflection smiling when their actual face was serious. And the paintings on the walls between the mirrors, you could have sworn they were different than they'd been when you first entered. The landscape seemed darker now, the forest deeper, the skies more ominous. And the portraits seemed to watch the dancers with something that looked almost like hunger in their painted eyes. You shook your head slightly, blaming the champagne or the late hour or the strangeness of the whole experience. This was just a party, you told yourself. An unusual party, certainly, in an unusual house, but still just a gathering of people who like drama and mystery and dressing up in costumes. And yet you couldn't quite convince yourself of that. There was something else here, something more. You could feel it in the air, in the music, in the way the other guests moved and spoke. They all seemed to know something you didn't, to be part of some secret that you'd only glimpsed the edges of. First time, a woman's voice asked, and you turned to find yourself facing a figure in deep green. Her gown was silk, the color of emeralds, with a fitted bodice and a skirt that fell in elegant folds to the floor. Her mask was gold, shaped like a cat's face, with pointed ears and long whiskers that trembled when she moved her head. Yes, you admitted. Is it that obvious? The cat-masked woman laughed, a sound like wind chimes. Not obvious, no. But there's a certain look that first-timers have. A combination of wonder and confusion, like they've stumbled into a dream and aren't quite sure if they're going to wake up. That's exactly how it feels, you said, grateful to have someone put it into words. It will make more sense as the night goes on, she said. Or perhaps it will make less sense, but you'll care less about understanding it. Sometimes that's the same thing. She gestured toward the rest of the ballroom. Have you explored yet? Beyond this room, I mean. There's so much more to see. I didn't realize we were allowed to explore, you said. Oh, You're encouraged to, she assured you. That's part of the point of the masquerade. To wander, to discover, to find things you didn't know were waiting for you. All the doors are open tonight. Well, almost all of them. The locked ones are locked for good reason, but you'll know those when you find them. What kind of things are there to discover? You asked, intrigued despite your caution. The Catwoman tilted her head, considering. Libraries full of books that no longer exist anywhere else. Gardens that bloom at midnight. Rooms where time moves differently than it does out here. Conversations with people who might change the way you see the world. Or yourself. She reached out and touched your arm lightly, a gesture of reassurance. Don't be afraid to wander. That's why you're here, after all. To explore, to experience, to step outside the boundaries of your ordinary life. You're perfectly safe within these walls, as long as you remember one thing. What's that, you asked? When the clock strikes 3, you must leave. No matter what you're doing, no matter how interesting the conversation or how beautiful the moment. When you hear those chimes, go immediately. Don't linger, don't try to stay. The masquerade ends at 3, and it's important that you respect that boundary. What happens if I don't? You asked, half joking. But the Catwoman's expression, what you could see of it behind her mask, was serious. Nothing good. The magic that makes this night possible, that keeps this house and all of us safe, it only works within certain parameters. Outside those parameters, things can go wrong. So promise me and promise yourself when the clock strikes 3, you'll leave. I promise, you said, feeling the weight of that promise settle over you. She smiled then, the seriousness falling away. Good. Now go, explore, enjoy yourself. Dance with strangers, taste strange foods, lose yourself in the mystery of it all. This is your night, after all. Make the most of it. With that, she drifted away into the crowd, her green gown bright against the darker colors around her, her golden mask catching the light as she moved. You finished your champagne and set the empty glass on the tray of a passing waiter. Then, following the Catwoman's advice, you moved toward one of the doorways that led out of the ballroom. This one opened onto a corridor lined with more paintings and lit by more candles. The carpet beneath your feet was deep burgundy, so soft that your footsteps made no sound at all. Doors stood at intervals along both sides of the corridor, some closed, some partially open, inviting exploration. You passed the closed doors without trying them, respecting the privacy or secrecy they implied. But the open doors called to you, and you paused at each one to look inside. One room was a study filled with books from floor to ceiling. A fire burned in the fireplace, even though it was spring, and leather armchairs sat invitingly near the hearth. A man in a black mask sat in one of the chairs, reading a book that looked ancient, its pages yellowed and fragile. He glanced up as you paused in the doorway and nodded at you, but he didn't speak, and after a moment you moved on. Another room was a music room, smaller than the ballroom, but no less elegant. A grand piano sat near the windows, its surface polished to a high shine. A woman in pale blue sat at the piano, playing softly, not the same music that came from the ballroom, but something else, something more personal and intimate. She too looked up as you passed, and she smiled, her fingers never stopping their movement across the keys. A third room was filled with masks, hundreds of them, perhaps thousands, displayed on the walls and on stands and in glass cases. They were every type imaginable, leather and silk, wood and metal, simple and elaborate, beautiful and grotesque. Some looked ancient, others modern. Some looked human, others decidedly not. You stepped into this room, drawn by the sheer variety, the sheer creativity on display. As you moved among the masks, you noticed that some of them seemed to watch you, their empty eye holes following your movement. You told yourself it was just a trick of the candlelight, the way the flames flickered and cast moving shadows. But it felt like more than that. It felt like the masks were aware, somehow, of your presence. Near the back of the room, you found a mask that caught your attention more than the others. It was simple in design, just a half mask like the one you wore, but it was made of what looked like moonlight. Silver white, luminous, seeming to glow from within. You reached out to touch it, your fingers drawn to its surface as though by magnetism. "Beautiful, isn't it?" a voice said behind you, and you jumped, startled. You thought you were alone in the room. You turned to find a woman standing there. She was perhaps your age, though it was hard to tell behind her mask. She wore a gown of deep violet, and her mask was black lace, similar to yours but with different patterns worked into the fabric. "I'm sorry," you said. "I didn't realize anyone else was here." "I've been here the whole time," she said with a smile. "But sometimes in this house, you don't see things or people until you're ready to see them." She moved closer, standing beside you to look at the moonlight mask. "This one is special," she said softly. "It said that if you wear it, you can see things as they really are, beneath all the illusions and pretenses. But there's a cost." "What cost?" you asked. "You can never unsee what it shows you," she said. "Once you put it on, even if you take it off immediately, you'll carry that sight with you for the rest of your life. You'll see through lies and facades, yes, but you'll also see the darkness that lives in people's hearts, including your own. It's a heavy gift." You pulled your hand back from the mask, suddenly uncertain. "Have you worn it?" you asked. She shook her head. "No, I'm not brave enough, or perhaps I'm too wise. I prefer my comfortable illusions, my willful ignorance of the worst parts of human nature. But others have worn it, and they've never been quite the same afterwards." She touched your arm gently, the same reassuring gesture the Catwoman had made. "But don't let me frighten you away from exploring. Not every mask in this room has such weight attached to it. Most of them are simply beautiful, simply fun. Try one on if you like. See who you might be behind a different face." The idea was tempting, you had to admit. Who would you be if you wore a different mask? Would you feel different, act different, become someone new? But looking around the room at all those watching eye holes, you decided you were content with the mask you already wore. It had brought you this far, after all. It had gotten you through the gates and into the house and onto the dance floor. It was enough. "Maybe later," you told the woman in violet, and she nodded as though she understood. You left the mask room and continued down the corridor. More rooms revealed themselves to you as you walked. A conservatory full of night-blooming flowers whose scent was intoxicating. A gallery of sculpture where marble figures seemed to breathe in the candlelight. A small theater where a play was being performed for an audience of 3. Each room was a world unto itself, each one offering something different, something unique. You could have spent hours in any one of them, but you felt drawn to keep moving, to keep exploring, to see what else this house might contain. Eventually, the corridor opened onto a set of glass doors that led outside. Through them, You could see the gardens you'd glimpsed from the upstairs gallery. The lanterns hanging in the trees cast a warm glow over paths and flower beds, and you could see a few other guests wandering among the plantings. You stepped outside, breathing in the cool night air. After the warmth of the house, it felt refreshing, clearing your head of some of the dreamy fog that had settled over you. The music from the ballroom was still audible out here, but fainter, muted, so that it blended with the sound of wind in the trees and water splashing from a fountain somewhere in the darkness. The garden was even more beautiful than you'd imagine from your glimpses through windows. Roses climbed over arbors and trellises, their blooms open despite the late hour, their scent thick and sweet on the air. Other flowers that you couldn't name grew in carefully tended beds, their petals pale in the lantern light. Paths of white gravel crunched softly beneath your feet as you walked, winding between the plantings in patterns that seemed random but probably weren't. You came upon the fountain after a few minutes of wandering. It was large, made of dark stone carved into the shape of a rose. Water flowing from the flowers centered to cascade down the petals into a pool below. Pennies and small coins glinted at the bottom of the pool. Wishes, you suppose, though you wondered what kinds of wishes people made at a midnight masquerade. A bench sat near the fountain, and you sank onto it gratefully, your feet aching a bit from all the walking and dancing. You took off your shoes and wiggled your toes, sighing with relief. Your dress pulled around you in folds of midnight velvet, and you ran your fingers over the soft fabric absently as you sat and watched the waterfall. Escaping the crowds, a voice asked, and you looked up to see a man standing nearby. He wore a suit of deep blue, almost the same color as your dress, and his mask was white porcelain shaped like a plague doctor's mask with a long curved beak. Behind it, his eyes were impossible to read. "Just taking a break," you said, catching my breath. He gestured to the bench. "May I join you?" You nodded, and he sat beside you, leaving a respectful distance between you. For a few moments, neither of you spoke, both of you simply watching the fountain, listening to the water and the distant music. "It's overwhelming, isn't it?" he said finally. "The first time you come to one of these. All the sights and sounds, all the mystery and possibility. It's wonderful, but it's also exhausting." "Yes," you agreed. "Exactly that. I feel like I'm living through a dream, and I'm not sure when I'm going to wake up." "That's one of the gifts of the masquerade," he said. "It blurs the line between dreaming and waking, between reality and fantasy. By the time the night is over, you won't be entirely sure which parts were real and which parts you imagined. But that's all right. Sometimes the imagined parts are just as important as the real ones." He turned to look at you, his beaked mask giving him an otherworldly appearance. "What brought you here tonight? I don't mean physically. I mean, what drew you to accept the invitation? Most people who are invited either come immediately or throw the invitation away in fear. You came. What made you brave enough to walk through those gates? You thought about the question, trying to find the right words. "I think," you said slowly, "I was ready for something different, something more. My life is fine, good even. I'm not unhappy, but it feels small sometimes, bounded by routine and responsibility. When I got the invitation, it felt like a door opening onto something larger, something extraordinary. And I realized I didn't want to spend the rest of my life wondering what I'd missed by not walking through that door." He nodded. "That's a good answer. An honest one. And you're right, it is a door. What you do with what you find on the other side, that's up to you." Some people come to the masquerade once and never return. They get what they need from the experience and go back to their ordinary lives, changed in small ways but fundamentally themselves. Others become regulars, returning year after year, always seeking that same sense of possibility, that same magic. What about you, you asked? Which are you? He laughed softly, a sound muffled by his mask. I suppose I'm a regular, though I don't think of it that way. I think of it as coming home in a sense. This house, these people, this night, it's where I belong. Out there in the regular world, I'm just playing a part. Here I'm real. You understood what he meant, even though you'd only been here a few hours. There was something about the masquerade, about the freedom of anonymity and the permission to be strange and mysterious, that felt more authentic than the polite facades you wore in daily life. Do you ever wish, you asked, that the masquerade lasted longer? That it didn't have to end at 3? He was quiet for a long moment. Sometimes, he admitted, but I've learned that the magic of this night depends partly on its limitations. If it lasted forever, it would become ordinary. It's the scarcity, the temporariness that makes it precious. We have a few hours in which anything is possible, and then we have to return to the world where things are fixed and solid and predictable. But we carry the memory of these hours with us, and that memory can sustain us through all the ordinary days that follow. You thought about that, about the idea that some magic needed boundaries to remain magical. It made a kind of sense, even if part of you wanted to protest, wanted to stay in this dreamlike space forever. The man stood, offering you his hand. Come on, he said. Let me show you something before the night gets much older. You put your shoes back on and took his hand, letting him pull you to your feet. He led you deeper into the gardens, away from the fountain, along paths that grew narrower and darker as the lanterns spread farther apart. You passed through an archway covered in climbing roses, their thorns casting strange shadows in the dim light. Beyond the archway, the garden changed. The plantings here were wilder, less carefully controlled. Trees grew closer together, their branches forming a canopy overhead that blocked out the stars. The path beneath your feet was dirt now rather than gravel, soft and silent. Where are we going? You asked, your voice barely above a whisper. Something about this part of the garden made you want to be quiet, to move carefully, to show respect for something you didn't quite understand. You'll see, he said, and there was a smile in his voice, a promise of something worth seeing. The path wound through the wild garden for several minutes, long enough that you began to wonder if you should have followed this stranger into the darkness. But then the trees opened up ahead of you, and you stepped out into a clearing that took your breath away. It was a hedge maze, but unlike any maze you'd ever seen. The hedges were tall, perhaps 10 feet high, made of some dark plant you couldn't identify. But it wasn't the hedges themselves that amazed you. It was what grew on them. Flowers, hundreds or thousands of them, blooming all over the surface of the hedges. And they glowed. Some were pale blue, giving off a gentle light like moonlight. Others were soft green, like phosphorescence. Still others were purple or pink or white, each adding their own light to the overall glow. Together, they lit the entire maze with a soft, magical radiance that was just bright enough to see by but dim enough to maintain the sense of mystery and shadow. It's beautiful, you breathed, and the plague doctor masked man nodded. Midnight flowers, he said. They only bloom at night, only in darkness. If you bring them into light, Real light, sunlight or electric light, they close up and die. But here, in the dark, they thrive. He gestured toward the entrance to the maze. Would you like to walk through it? Or are you afraid of getting lost? You looked at the maze, at the glowing flowers and the shadowy paths between the hedges. You should probably be afraid, you thought. You were in the middle of a strange garden with a masked stranger, about to enter a maze that you might not find your way out of. But the fear that should have been there was absent, replaced by curiosity and that same sense of possibility you'd been feeling all night. I'm not afraid, you said, and you meant it. He smiled behind his mask. You could see the way his eyes crinkled at the corners. Good. Then let's go. The entrance to the maze was marked by an arch of the glowing flowers, woven together to form a gateway. You stepped through it and into the maze itself, the plague doctor masked man beside you. Inside the maze, the world seemed to shrink down to just the path ahead of you and the hedges on either side, so tall they blocked your view of anything beyond them. The flowers provided just enough light to see where you were going, but not enough to see very far ahead. Every turn might lead to another path or might lead to a dead end. There was no way to know until you got there. You turned left at the first intersection, following instinct rather than any real plan. The plague doctor masked man followed, not trying to direct you, letting you choose your own way. The path curved and turned, split and rejoined itself. Sometimes you'd walk for a while without any choice of direction, and sometimes you'd come to a point where 3 or 4 paths diverged, each one looking equally promising or equally treacherous. There's no wrong way through, the man said at one point, after you'd been walking for several minutes. Every path leads somewhere. Some take longer than others, but they all eventually lead either to the center or back to the entrance. What's at the center, you asked. You'll see, he said again, that same promise in his voice. You continued on, making choices at random, sometimes doubling back when you hit a dead end, sometimes pressing forward with confidence. Time seemed strange in the maze, just as it had seemed strange in the house. You might have been walking for 10 minutes or an hour, you couldn't tell. But eventually, after more turns and choices than you could count, you came to a place where the path opened up into a circular space at the heart of the maze. And in the center of that space was a tree. It was unlike any tree you'd ever seen. Tall and ancient looking, with a trunk so wide it would take several people holding hands to encircle it. The bark was dark, almost black, and covered in ridges and whorls that looked almost like faces if you looked at them the right way. But it was the tree's branches and leaves that were truly extraordinary. The branches spread out in every direction, creating a canopy that covered the entire circular space. And from those branches hung more of the glowing flowers, along with what looked like crystals or glass teardrops. So many of them that the whole tree seemed to shimmer and sparkle in the dim light. The leaves were silver on one side and dark green on the other, and when the slight breeze moved through them, they rustled with a sound like whispered secrets. This is the heart of the estate, the plague doctor masked man said softly. The oldest tree on the property, perhaps the oldest tree in the region. It's been here for centuries, long before the house was built. Some say it's the reason the house was built here, that the Ashford family was drawn to this place because of the tree's power. What kind of power? You asked, stepping closer to the tree. Drawn by its beauty and its strangeness. The power to grant wishes, some say. The power to show people their futures, others claim. I think it's simpler than that. I think the tree is just a place where the veil between what is and what could be grows thin. Stand beneath its branches, and you might see possibilities you hadn't considered before. You might understand truths about yourself that you've been avoiding. Or you might just feel peaceful, connected to something larger than yourself. He gestured toward the tree. Go ahead. Stand beneath it. See what it has to show you. You walked slowly toward the tree, feeling the weight of the moment, the significance of it. When you stepped beneath the canopy of branches, the world seemed to shift slightly, the way it does when you stand up too fast or spin around with your eyes closed. You reached out a hand to steady yourself against the trunk, and the bark beneath your palm was warm, as though the tree had a heartbeat, a life force of its own. You closed your eyes and breathed deeply, inhaling the scent of earth and flowers and something else, something clean and wild that you couldn't name. You felt the tree's presence around you, ancient and patient and knowing. And in that moment, standing there with your hand on the bark and your eyes closed, you saw something. Not with your physical eyes, with some other kind of sight, some inner vision. You saw yourself as you were right now in your 40s, standing at this crossroads in your life. And you saw other versions of yourself branching out from this moment like the branches of the tree. Versions of yourself who made different choices, took different paths, became different people. You saw a version of yourself who left the masquerade early, who went home and never returned, who spent the rest of her life wondering what she'd missed. That version of you was safe but small, her world bounded by caution and fear. You saw a version of yourself who stayed past 3 o'clock despite the warning, who pushed boundaries and broke rules, who chased the magic without regard for consequences. That version of you was free but lost, consumed by her hunger for more, for always more, until she couldn't find her way back to anything real. And you saw a version of yourself who walked the middle path, who took the magic offered by this night, but also knew when to let it go, who carried what she learned here back into her ordinary life and let it transform her from within. That version of you was neither safe nor lost. She was balanced, grounded in reality, but still open to wonder. You understood in that moment that the choice was yours. The tree wasn't showing you a fixed future. It was showing you possibilities. What you made of this night, what you took from it and what you left behind, that was up to you. When you opened your eyes, the world had settled back into place. The plague doctor masked man was watching you, his expression unreadable behind his mask. Did you see something? He asked. Yes, you said simply. You didn't elaborate, and he didn't push. Some experiences you were learning were meant to be private, held close to the heart rather than shared. You stood beneath the tree for a few minutes longer, your hand still resting on the trunk, feeling that strange warmth, that sense of connection. Then, finally, you stepped back, breaking the physical contact, but carrying the memory of it with you. Thank you, you said to the man, for bringing me here. He inclined his head. It's the best thing I can show a first-timer. The heart of the masquerade, in a very literal sense. Now you understand what this night is really about, not just costumes and mystery, but transformation, possibility, seeing yourself clearly enough to make real choices about who you want to be. He offered his arm, and you took it, letting him lead you out of the circular space and back into the maze. Finding your way out was easier than finding your way in. The paths seemed to open up before you, guiding you back toward the entrance almost without effort. When you emerged from the maze back into the wild garden, you felt different. Not dramatically changed, not someone entirely new, but shifted somehow. More aware of yourself, of your choices, of the life you were living and the lives you could be living. The plague doctor masked man walked with you back through the gardens toward the house. The music from the ballroom grew louder as you approached, and you could see through the glass doors that the dancing was still going on, the masked figures still swirling across the floor. "Will you dance again?" he asked as you reached the doors. You considered. "Maybe, but I think I'd like to explore a bit more first. See what else the house has to offer." He nodded. "A wise choice. Pace yourself. The night is long, but not endless. Make the most of every moment, but don't try to do everything. Choose what calls to you most strongly." He bowed then, a formal gesture that seemed fitting for the night and the setting. "It's been a pleasure talking with you. I hope the rest of your evening is everything you want it to be." "Thank you," you said. "I hope so too." He turned and walked away, disappearing into the house, leaving you standing at the glass doors looking out into the gardens and in toward the ballroom, poised between exterior and interior, between solitude and society. After a moment, you stepped inside, back into the warmth and light and music. The ballroom was still full of guests, and the dancing continued, but you found yourself drawn away from it, back toward the gallery and the corridors beyond, curious to see what else you might discover. You climbed the grand staircase again, this time going up past the second floor to the third. The corridors here were narrower, more intimate, lined with doors that were mostly closed. But one stood open, and as you passed it, you heard voices, soft conversation, laughter. You paused in the doorway and saw a small sitting room, furnished with velvet couches and armchairs arranged in a circle. Perhaps a dozen people sat there, all masked, all holding glasses of wine or brandy, engaged in animated conversation. One of them noticed you standing there and waved you in. "Join us," she called. "We're just talking, sharing stories. Everyone's welcome." You hesitated, then stepped inside. The woman who'd invited you patted the seat beside her on one of the couches, and you sat, feeling the velvet soft beneath you. "We were just discussing," the woman said, "the masks we wear in everyday life. Not physical masks like tonight, but the personas we put on to get through the world. The different faces we show to different people." "Everyone wears masks," a man across the circle said. He wore a mask shaped like comedy, smiling broadly, exaggeratedly cheerful. But his voice was serious, thoughtful. "We have our work faces, our friend faces, our family faces. Rarely do we show anyone our real face, the one underneath all the performances." "Is there a real face underneath?" another woman asked. She wore a tragedy mask, the opposite of the comedy mask, its expression sorrowful. "Or are we just the sum of all our masks, all our performances? Maybe there's no core self, just different versions we cycle through depending on context." The conversation continued, philosophical and deep, and you found yourself drawn into it, offering your own thoughts, listening to others. Everyone here seemed intelligent and thoughtful, willing to consider different perspectives, to question their own assumptions. Time passed, you weren't sure how much. The conversation flowed from topic to topic, from the nature of identity to the meaning of happiness to the role of art in society. Someone brought more wine, and you accepted a glass, sipping slowly as you listened and spoke and thought. Eventually, you excused yourself, feeling the need to move again, to see more. You thanked the group for including you, and they waved you off with warm wishes and invitations to return if you wanted to. Back in the corridor, you continued your exploration. You found a room full of mirrors, not masked this time, but mirrors of all sizes and shapes, some flat and some curved, some clear and some tinted. Looking into them, you saw yourself reflected in 100 different ways, taller, shorter, wider, thinner, distorted and changed and strange. It was disorienting and fascinating, and you spent several minutes moving through the room, watching your reflection shift and change. You found a conservatory on the 3rd floor, smaller than the one below, but even more lush, full of plants that shouldn't have been able to grow indoors, that needed tropical heat and humidity. The air here was thick and warm, almost like a living thing, and the scent of growing things was overwhelming. You sat on a stone bench surrounded by ferns and orchids and let the warmth seep into your bones. You found a room that seemed to be a study or office, with a large desk covered in papers and books and what looked like maps of places that might or might not exist. A woman sat at the desk, writing in a journal with a quill pen, her mask pushed up on top of her head as she worked. She glanced up as you entered, smiled, and went back to her writing, undisturbed by your presence. Each room was a world, each one offering something different, and you moved through them like a ghost, observing, experiencing, taking what you needed and leaving the rest. At some point, you found yourself back in the ballroom, drawn by the music and the movement. The dancing had evolved. It was less formal now, less structured. Couples and groups moved in ways that were more free-form, more interpretive, responding to the music in their own individual ways rather than following set steps. You joined them, finding a space on the floor and simply moving, letting the music guide your body. You danced alone at first, then with others who moved close and then away, a fluid interchange of bodies and energy. No one spoke. The dancing was its own conversation, its own language. You danced until you were breathless, until your feet ached and your heart pounded and you felt more alive than you had in years. Then you retreated to the edge of the room, accepted more champagne from a passing waiter, and watched the others continue. The clock on the wall read 2:30. You'd been here for more than 2.5 hours, and it felt both like minutes and like an entire lifetime. You thought about the Catwoman's warning, about needing to leave when the clock struck 3. You had half an hour left, 30 more minutes in this magical space before you'd need to return to the ordinary world. You decided to spend it back in the gardens, in the cool night air, under the stars. You made your way through the house, down the stairs, through the glass doors, and out into the night. The gardens were quieter now. Most of the guests had either gone inside or were focused on other parts of the estate. You walked alone along the paths, retracing some of your earlier steps, discovering new areas you hadn't seen before. You found a rose garden, the flowers dark red and almost black in the lantern light, their scent heavy and intoxicating. You found a small pond with water lilies floating on its surface, their white flowers ghostly in the darkness. You found a gazebo, its white painted wood and vine-covered roof a pale beacon among the darker plantings. You climbed the steps into the gazebo and sat on one of the benches that lined its interior. From here, you could see the house in the distance, its windows glowing, the music a faint thread on the night air. You could see the garden spread out around you, the lanterns hanging in the trees like fallen stars. You could see other guests, dark shapes moving through the landscape on their own journeys of discovery and experience. This was it, you realized. This moment right here, sitting in a gazebo at a mysterious estate, dressed in velvet and lace, watching a masquerade unfold around you in the deep hours of the night. This was what you'd come for, what you'd accepted the invitation for. Not any specific experience or person or conversation, but this feeling. This sense of being alive in a way you'd forgotten was possible. This awareness of beauty and mystery and magic existing in the world, waiting to be discovered by those brave enough to seek it. You thought about what the plague Dr. Maskman had said, about carrying the memory of this night with you through all the ordinary days to come. You understood now what he meant. This night would become a touchstone, something to return to in your mind when life felt too small or too dull or too predictable. You'd remember the glowing maze and the ancient tree, the ballroom full of masked dancers and the philosophical conversations, the champagne and the music and the feeling of velvet against your skin. And more than that, you'd remember what you'd learned about possibility, about choice, about the different versions of yourself that existed as potentials, waiting for you to step into them. You'd remember that transformation was possible, that magic was real, that wonder could be found if you were willing to look for it. A bell began to chime somewhere in the house, deep and sonorous. You counted the strikes. 1, 2, 3. The masquerade was over. Time to leave. You stood up from the gazebo bench and made your way back through the gardens toward the house. Other guests were doing the same, all moving in the same direction, all silent. There was a solemnity to this departure, a recognition that something precious was ending. You entered the house through the glass doors and joined the stream of guests moving toward the front entrance. No one rushed, but no one lingered either. Everyone seemed to understand the importance of respecting the 3 o'clock boundary. In the entrance hall, the silent black masked figures stood by the doors, seeing guests out. You passed between them and descended the front steps. The driveway stretched ahead of you, lit by those same lanterns, leading back toward the iron gates and the world beyond. You walked slowly, wanting to draw out these last moments to hold onto the magic for as long as possible. Other guests walked around you, some alone, some in small groups. A few had removed their masks now, but most kept them on, as though unwilling to let go of their masked identities, just yet. At the gates, you paused and looked back at the house. It sat there, solid and dark against the night sky, its windows still glowing, music still faintly audible from its depths. It looked like something from a fairy tale, like something that might not be there if you came back in the daylight. Then you turned and stepped through the gates onto Thornhill Road and began the walk back toward town. The streets were empty at this hour, silent except for the sound of your footsteps and those of the other departing guests. The sky to the east was just beginning to lighten, the stars fading as dawn approached. You walked in a kind of trance, still half in the world of the masquerade, not quite ready to return fully to reality. When you reached your own neighborhood, the streets looked both familiar and strange. This was your world, the place where you lived your everyday life, but you were seeing it with new eyes now. The houses seemed different, the street lamps cast different shadows, even the air smelled different, or maybe you were different, changed by your night at the Ashford estate. You climbed the stairs to your apartment and let yourself in, closing the door softly behind you. The space was exactly as you'd left it. Why wouldn't it be? But somehow you'd expected it to have changed, to reflect the transformation you'd undergone. You removed your mask and set it on the dresser, next to the invitation that had started all this. You undressed slowly, hanging the midnight velvet dress in your closet where it seemed to absorb the light even here, in your ordinary bedroom. You washed your face, changed into your night clothes, and climbed into bed. But you couldn't sleep, not yet. Your mind was too full of images and memories, too alive with the experiences of the night. So you lay there in the growing dawn light, thinking about all you'd seen and done and learned. You thought about the masked strangers you danced with, talked with, observed. You wondered who they were in their everyday lives, what masks they wore when they left the masquerade behind. You wondered if you'd see any of them again, either at future masquerades or in the ordinary world, and if you'd recognize them without their masks. You thought about the house itself, with its ballrooms and libraries and maze of rooms, each one a treasure waiting to be discovered. You wondered about the Ashford family, about their history and their reasons for hosting these gatherings. You wondered if you'd ever learn the full story, or if that too would remain a mystery. You thought about the tree at the heart of the maze, about the vision it had shown you of possible futures, possible selves. You thought about the choice you'd made, to walk the middle path, to take the magic without being consumed by it. You hoped you'd have the strength to live that choice, to carry the wonder of this night into your everyday life without losing yourself in the pursuit of more wonder, more magic, more mystery. As the sun rose fully, painting your room in shades of gold and rose, you finally felt sleep beginning to pull at you. You let yourself drift, secure in the knowledge that whatever came next, you had this night, this experience, this memory of transformation and possibility. Your last thought before sleep claimed you was simple. You'd go back next year. When the invitation came, and somehow you knew it would come, you'd accept again. You'd return to the Ashford estate, to the midnight masquerade, to that place where the impossible became possible and masks allowed you to be more truly yourself than you could be anywhere else. But that was a year away. For now, you had this night to remember and all the ordinary days ahead in which to live out what you'd learned. You slept deeply, dreamlessly, and when you woke in the afternoon, you felt refreshed in a way you hadn't felt in years. The world outside your window looked brighter, sharper, more alive with possibility. And you knew that something fundamental had shifted inside you, that you'd never quite see the world the same way again. Epilogue, the days after. The days following the masquerade had a strange quality to them. On the surface, everything continued as it always had. You went to work, ran your errands, met with friends, kept to your routines. But underneath, something had changed. You found yourself noticing things you'd never noticed before. The way light fell through leaves, the expressions on strangers' faces, the small moments of beauty and grace that happened all around you if you paid attention. Your coworkers asked if you'd had a good weekend, and you smiled and said yes without elaborating. How could you explain where you'd been, what you'd experienced? They wouldn't understand, or worse, they'd think you were making it up. So you kept it to yourself, a precious secret, a private treasure. But keeping it secret didn't mean forgetting it. If anything, you found yourself returning to the memories constantly, turning them over in your mind like stones in your pocket, smooth and comforting. You'd be sitting at your desk at work and suddenly remember the feeling of waltzing across that ballroom floor. You'd be making dinner and think of the glowing flowers in the maze. You'd be getting ready for bed and see your mask on the dresser, silent reminder of that night when you'd been someone extraordinary. The mask stayed on your dresser where you could see it every day. Sometimes you'd put it on and look at yourself in the mirror, trying to recapture that feeling of mystery and power. But it wasn't quite the same without the dress, without the house, without the music and the other masked strangers. Still, it was a touchstone, a physical link to that experience. The dress stayed in your closet, hanging in a place of honor. You found excuses to open the closet door and look at it, to touch the velvet and remember how it had felt to wear it. You wondered if you'd ever wear it again, or if it would hang there for a year, waiting for the next masquerade. About a week after the masquerade, you went back to Thornhill Road. You walked there in the afternoon, in full daylight, curious to see what the Ashford estate looked like in the light of day. But when you reached the spot where you remembered the gates being, there was nothing. Just trees and underbrush, no gates, no driveway, no hint that a house had ever stood there. You walked up and down the road several times, certain you had the right place, but finding no evidence of it. Either you'd somehow remembered wrong, or the estate existed in a space that wasn't accessible during daylight hours, or perhaps it only appeared when the invitation called it into being. The mystery of it delighted you rather than frustrated you. Of course, the masquerade wouldn't make itself easy to find, wouldn't leave itself vulnerable to casual discovery. Its elusiveness was part of its magic. You found yourself more engaged with life than you'd been in years. You took up hobbies you'd let fall by the wayside. Painting, which you'd loved in college but given up in the press of adult responsibilities. Playing the piano, which sat mostly silent in your living room but now filled your evenings with music. Writing in a journal, trying to capture in words what you'd experienced and learned. You were more present in conversations, actually listening to what people said rather than just waiting for your turn to talk. You noticed things about your friends and family that you'd overlooked before, small kindnesses, hidden sorrows, private joys. You became someone people sought out, sensing that you'd listen, that you'd understand, that you carried some kind of wisdom or peace that they wanted to be near. At work, you took on new challenges, volunteered for projects you'd have avoided before. Not because you were suddenly ambitious in a career sense, but because you wanted to experience more, to test yourself, to see what you were capable of. Your supervisor noticed and commented on your increased engagement, and you just smiled and said you'd had a revelation about the importance of making the most of every opportunity. You went on dates, something you hadn't done much of in recent years. You joined a social group for people your age who wanted to try new things, and through them you went hiking and took a cooking class and attended wine tastings and art gallery openings. You didn't find romance, but you found connection, community, the pleasure of sharing experiences with others. The world felt bigger than it had before, full of possibilities you hadn't considered. Every day held potential for small discoveries, small moments of magic. And while none of them matched the intensity of the masquerade, they didn't need to. The masquerade had shown you what was possible, had opened your eyes to the wonder that existed in the world. Now you could find your own smaller wonders in everyday life. Months passed, and the memory of the masquerade didn't fade so much as it settled into something softer, something you could carry more easily. You still thought about it often, but not with the sharp immediacy of the first few weeks. It had become part of you, woven into your identity in subtle ways. You sometimes wondered about the other guests, the man in the silver mask you danced with, the Catwoman in green, the plague doctor who'd shown you the maze, the woman in violet in the mask room, all the others you'd encountered or observed. Were they changed too? Had the masquerade affected them the way it had affected you? Or were some of them regulars who took it in stride, just another night in a long string of magical nights? You found yourself looking at people differently on the street, in stores, at work. Could that be someone who'd been at the masquerade? That woman in line at the coffee shop, that man waiting for the bus, that couple holding hands in the park. Were any of them kindred spirits who'd walked through those iron gates and danced in that candlelit ballroom? You'd never know, of course, unless you broke the unspoken rule of the masquerade and asked directly. And you wouldn't do that. The anonymity was important, the mystery was important. But it was fun to imagine, fun to think that you might be surrounded by others who'd shared the experience, all of you carrying the secret silently. As fall turned to winter and winter to spring, you found yourself anticipating. The invitation had come in the spring before, in early May. Would it come again? Would you be invited back, or had your one night been enough? You try not to think about it too much. Try not to let anticipation turn into anxiety. But as May approached, you found yourself checking your mailbox more frequently, looking for that telltale burgundy envelope. And then one evening in late April, there it was, slipped under your door while you were making tea, just like before. The same heavy burgundy paper, the same black wax seal with the rose and thorns, the same silver ink writing your name in elegant script. Your hands trembled slightly as you opened it. The card inside was identical to the first one with the same message: you are cordially invited to the midnight masquerade, a gathering of kindred spirits beneath the dark moon. Saturday next, at the stroke of midnight. The old Ashford estate on Thornhill Road. Come as you are, but wear your mask. We have been waiting for you. You sat down heavily, the invitation clutched in your hands, and felt tears prick your eyes. You hadn't realized how much you'd been hoping for this, how much you needed to know that the door was still open, that the magic was still available to you. This time, the days between receiving the invitation and Saturday night didn't drag. They moved at a normal pace, and you spent them in eager preparation. You took your dress to be cleaned and pressed. You practiced your dancing in your living room. You thought about what you wanted to experience this time, what parts of the house you wanted to explore that you'd missed the first time. But you also promised yourself that you wouldn't try to recapture the exact experience of the first masquerade. This would be different because you were different. You'd go with an open mind and an open heart, ready for whatever the night brought, without trying to force it to be a particular thing. Saturday arrived, and you went through your evening preparations with a sense of ritual, of rightness. The bath, the careful application of makeup, the sliding of the velvet dress over your skin, the settling of the mask on your face. Looking in the mirror, you saw that mysterious woman again, but this time she was familiar. She was you, or part of you, the part that embraced mystery and magic and possibility. The walk to Thornhill Road was easier this time, though no less magical. You knew where you were going, knew what to expect, but that didn't diminish the wonder of it. The iron gate stood open just as before. The lanterns hung in the trees, just as before. The house rose at the end of the driveway like something from a dream, just as before. But you were not as before. You were someone who'd been here before, someone who carried the memory of the first night with you. You were a returning guest rather than a first-timer, and that changed how you moved through the space, how you experienced it. The ballroom was just as beautiful, the music just as haunting, the guests just as mysterious. But this time, you didn't feel overwhelmed. You felt comfortable, as though you belonged here. You accepted a glass of champagne and sipped it slowly, watching the dancers, taking your time. A woman in deep blue approached you, her mask gold and decorated with sapphires. "Welcome back," she said, and you realize she must have seen you the year before, must have recognized something about you even behind the mask. "Thank you," you said. "It's good to be back." "Your first masquerade changed you," the woman observed. "I can see it. You move differently, hold yourself differently. You've integrated what you learned." "I tried to," you said. "I didn't want it to be just one magical night that I looked back on wistfully. I wanted it to actually change how I lived." The woman smiled. "That's the right approach. That's what the masquerade is truly for, not escapism, but transformation. Not running away from real life, but learning how to live real life more fully." She gestured around the ballroom. "Explore, experience, but remember what you learned last time. The magic is real, but so is the world outside these walls. The challenge is to live in both, to be both the person who can walk through these doors and the person who can walk back out of them." And that was what you did. You spent the night wandering through the house and gardens, dancing with strangers, engaging in deep conversations, losing yourself in the beauty and mystery of it all. But you also remained grounded, aware, conscious of yourself and your choices. You weren't trying to escape your life. You were enriching it, adding to it, gathering experiences and insights to bring back with you. You visited the maze again, found the tree at its heart, stood beneath its branches, and felt that same sense of connection, of possibility. But the visions you saw this time were different. You saw yourself as you were now, changed by the first masquerade, and you saw how you could continue to change, to grow, to become more fully yourself. You saw the path ahead of you, not fixed and predetermined, but full of choices, full of potential. You saw that you had the power to shape your life, to make it into something beautiful and meaningful, to find magic in the everyday world, just as you found it here in this enchanted house. When the clock struck 3, you left with the other guests, walking back through the gardens and down the driveway and through the iron gates. But this time you didn't feel sad. You felt fulfilled, satisfied, ready to return to your ordinary life and live it with the same intensity and presence you brought to the masquerade. The walk home was peaceful. You didn't rush, didn't try to hold onto the magical atmosphere. You let it fade naturally. Let yourself transition back into the everyday world, knowing that you carried the important parts with you. The insights, the experiences, the changed perspective. And when you got home and undressed and washed your face and climbed into bed, you felt complete. The masquerade was wonderful, magical, transformative. But so was your regular life, in its own quieter way. Both had value. Both had beauty. Both had meaning. As you drifted off to sleep, you thought about next year, about the invitation that would come again if you continued to need it, continued to be ready for it. But you didn't cling to that thought. You let it go, trusting that when the time was right, when you needed another dose of magic and mystery, the invitation would find you. For now, you had everything you needed. You had your memories, your changed perspective, your commitment to living fully. You had a year of ordinary days ahead of you, and you intended to find the magic in every single one of them. The masquerade had taught you that transformation was possible, that wonder existed in the world, that you had the power to choose who you wanted to be. Those lessons would stay with you, would guide you through whatever came next. And when you woke the next day, You didn't mourn the end of the masquerade. You celebrated having experienced it, and you looked forward to experiencing everything else life had to offer. The mundane and the magical, the ordinary and the extraordinary, all of it precious, all of it worth paying attention to, all of it part of the grand adventure of being alive. The years that followed, years passed, and the midnight masquerade became a regular part of your life's rhythm. Each spring, the invitation would arrive, and each spring, you would prepare yourself to return to the Ashford estate. Some years, the masquerade was much as it had been the first time. Familiar, comfortable, like returning to a place you knew well. Other years, it surprised you with new rooms you hadn't found before, new guests with new stories, new experiences that challenged and changed you. But the masquerade was never the totality of your life. It was a highlight, certainly, a night you looked forward to and treasured. But it was one night out of 365, and you made sure that the other 364 days mattered too. You continued to grow in your work, taking on more responsibility, finding ways to make your job meaningful rather than just a way to pay bills. You built deeper friendships, investing time and energy in the people who mattered to you. You traveled when you could, seeking out beauty and adventure in the wider world. You created art, wrote stories, made music, filled your life with creative expression. You dated, and sometimes those dates turned into relationships that lasted months or even years. None of them ended in marriage. That just wasn't the path your life took, but all of them taught you something, gave you something, added to who you were becoming. You learned about intimacy and vulnerability, about compromise and communication, about what you needed from a partner and what you had to give. You became known among your friends and family as someone who was fully present, fully alive. They noticed how you listened deeply when they spoke, how you engaged with the world around you, how you found joy and wonder in simple things. Some of them asked what had changed you, and you'd smile and say something vague about learning to pay attention, about deciding to make the most of the life you had. You never told them about the masquerade. That was your secret, your private magic. But you sometimes wondered if others in your life had their own secrets, their own sources of magic and transformation. That friend who'd become suddenly more confident after a solo trip abroad. That colleague who'd changed careers at 40 and seemed more fulfilled than ever. That family member who'd started meditating and radiated a new kind of peace. Maybe they'd found their own versions of the masquerade, their own doorways into deeper understanding of themselves and the world. At the masquerades, you became something of a regular. Not in the sense that you haunted the place or tried to build an identity around it, but in the sense that you were recognized by others who returned year after year. You'd see the same masks sometimes, the Catwoman in green, the Plague Doctor in blue, the comedy and tragedy masks, others whose identities remain hidden, but whose presence became familiar. You didn't try to break the anonymity, didn't try to find out who these people were in the outside world. That would have violated the spirit of the masquerade. But there was a companionship in the repeated encounters, a sense of being part of a community of seekers, all of you looking for something that the ordinary world didn't quite provide. Sometimes at the masquerades, you'd find yourself playing the role that others had played for you during your first visit. You'd notice someone who had that first-timer look, overwhelmed, uncertain, full of wonder and confusion, and you'd approach them gently, offer them some small piece of guidance or reassurance. You'd tell them about the tree in the maze, or about the importance of exploring at their own pace, or about remembering to leave at 3 o'clock. You'd pass on the wisdom that had been passed to you, keeping the tradition alive. And each time you did this, each time you helped orient a new guest or soothed a worried one, you felt a deep satisfaction. This was part of the gift of the masquerade, not just what you received, but what you could give back, how you could help others have the experience they needed. The house itself seemed to change from year to year, or perhaps you just discovered new parts of it. One year, you found a room full of hourglasses, each one measuring time in different ways, some running quickly, some slowly, some seemingly not at all. Another year, you discovered a gallery of photographs showing the estate in different eras, and you could see how it had evolved over decades, or perhaps centuries. Yet another year, you stumbled upon a small chapel, candlelit and quiet, where a few guests sat in meditation or prayer. Each discovery added to your understanding of the place, your sense of its history and purpose. The Ashford Estate was more than just a venue for parties. It was a living space full of intention and meaning, designed to facilitate transformation and self-discovery. You learned, over the years, that there were other guests who took their connection to the masquerade further than you did. Some became patrons, supporting the estate financially. Others volunteered their time to help maintain the gardens or restore rooms in the house. A few even lived there, taking on the role of those silent black masked figures who stood watch at the gates and doors. You were offered the opportunity to become more involved several times, but you always declined politely. You understood your own nature well enough to know that the masquerade worked for you precisely because it was bounded, limited, special. If it became a bigger part of your life, if you got too deeply involved in its operations and mysteries, it might lose some of its magic for you. Better to remain a grateful guest, a yearly visitor, someone who took what the masquerade offered and carried it back into the wider world. That was your role, your contribution, to be proof that transformation didn't require renouncing normal life, that magic and mundanity could coexist, that wonder could be found anywhere if you learned to look for it properly. As you move through your 40s and into your 50s, the masquerade continued to be relevant, though what you took from it changed. In your 40s, you'd been seeking confirmation that life still held possibility, that you hadn't missed your chance for adventure and meaning. The masquerade had given you that confirmation abundantly. In your 50s, you were seeking something different, a sense of continuity, of tradition, of connection to something larger than yourself. The masquerade provided that too. Returning year after year, seeing the same house and the same familiar masks, being part of a community that stretched across time, it anchored you, gave you a sense of belonging to a story that was bigger and older than your individual life. You began to think about your own mortality more in these years, as everyone does when they hit their 50s. You thought about what would happen when you eventually stopped receiving invitations, whether because you'd learned all you needed to learn from the masquerade, or because you'd aged beyond what it could offer, or simply because your time was done. The thought made you sad, but not desperately so. You'd learned to hold things lightly, to appreciate what you had while you had it and let go gracefully when it was time. You thought about what you'd want your last masquerade to be like, if you knew it was your last. You decided you want to spend as much as you'd spend your first one, wandering through the house and gardens, dancing with strangers, having deep conversations, standing beneath the tree in the maze, and feeling that sense of connection to something vast and mysterious. You'd want to be fully present for every moment, fully grateful for the experience. But you hoped that day was still far off. You hoped for many more years of spring invitations, many more Saturday midnights crossing the threshold of the Ashford estate, many more dances and conversations and discoveries. Reflections in the present. Now, looking back across the years, it's been more than a decade since your first masquerade. You can see how much that initial invitation changed the trajectory of your life. Not in dramatic, obvious ways. You didn't quit your job to pursue some wild dream. You didn't move to a foreign country or radically reinvent yourself. But the changes were real nonetheless, deep and lasting. You became someone who said yes more often, who took chances, who remained open to possibility. You became someone who valued experience over security, who prioritized growth over comfort. You became someone who could find magic in ordinary moments, who didn't need constant novelty or excitement to feel alive. The masquerade taught you that transformation was possible at any age, that it was never too late to become more fully yourself. It taught you that mystery and wonder existed in the world, that not everything needed to be explained or understood to be valuable. It taught you that connection with others was possible even in anonymity, that sometimes you could be most honest when hiding behind a mask. Most importantly, perhaps, it taught you to trust yourself. Trust your instincts about when to stay and when to leave. Trust your ability to handle the unknown. Trust that you could navigate between different worlds, the magical and the mundane, without losing yourself in either one. You think about all the people who received invitations over the years and chose not to go, who threw them away out of fear or skepticism or simple busyness. You understand their choice. The invitation was strange, the house was mysterious, the whole thing seemed risky and potentially foolish. But you're also grateful that you weren't one of them, that you had the courage or curiosity or recklessness to walk through those iron gates. Your life isn't perfect. You still have struggles and disappointments, bad days and difficult moments. The masquerade didn't solve all your problems or make you immune to the challenges of being human. But it gave you a framework for dealing with those challenges, a reminder that there was always more to life than whatever difficulty you were currently facing. When things got hard, you'd think about the tree in the maze, about the vision of different possible futures it had shown you. You'd remember that you always had choices, always had the power to shape your life, even if you couldn't control every circumstance. That memory, that reminder, helped you through more difficult times than you could count. You think about the Catwoman in green, who you've seen at every masquerade since your first one. You still don't know her name, still don't know what she does in her regular life, but you've come to think of her as a friend of sorts. Someone who understands this part of your life, this secret magic you carry. Last year, she pulled you aside and thanked you for something you'd said to her years ago, something about embracing uncertainty. She said it had helped her through a difficult transition, and she wanted you to know that your words had mattered. That conversation stayed with you. It reminded you that we're all affecting each other in ways we often don't realize, that kindness and wisdom ripple outward in ways we can't predict. It reminded you to be intentional about the energy you put out into the world, because it matters, it all matters. You think about the plague doctor who showed you the maze on your first night. You haven't seen that mask in years, and you wonder what happened to the person behind it. Did they stop coming to the masquerades? Did they graduate from needing them, moving on to some new phase of life? Or are they still there and you just haven't crossed paths? The mystery is part of the beauty, part of what makes each encounter at the masquerade precious. Looking around your apartment now, you can see evidence of how the masquerade has shaped your life. The mask still sits on your dresser, though it's been joined by others you've acquired over the years, gifts from other guests, purchases from that little boutique where you bought your first dress. Your closet holds multiple masquerade outfits now, each one chosen for a different year, each one carrying memories of the night you wore it. Your walls display art you've collected over the years, much of it acquired or inspired by what you've seen at the masquerades. A painting of a rose maze, a photograph of lanterns hanging in trees, a sculpture of intertwined masks, each piece a reminder, a touchstone, a way of keeping the magic alive in your everyday space. Your bookshelves hold journals full of your thoughts and reflections from masquerade nights, stories you've written based on what you've experienced, poetry that poured out of you in the days and weeks after particularly transformative visits. You don't read these often. They're private, personal, sometimes raw in their honesty. But you like knowing they're there, that you've documented this journey, that there's a record of how you've changed and grown. You've become a writer in a small way, publishing stories and essays in literary magazines. Nothing that's made you famous or wealthy, but work that's meaningful to you and to the small audience who finds it. Your writing is often described as having a quality of magic realism, of finding the extraordinary within the ordinary. You smile when you read those reviews, knowing where that quality comes from, what invisible source feeds your imagination. You've also become someone who mentors others, younger people at work or in your community who are searching for meaning, who feel stuck or uncertain about their lives. You don't tell them about the masquerade. That's not something you can share directly, but you share the lessons you've learned there, translated into language that makes sense outside that context. You tell them about the importance of saying yes to mystery, of taking calculated risks, of remaining open to transformation. You tell them about finding the courage to become more fully themselves, about how authenticity and self-knowledge are lifelong pursuits. You tell them about the value of community, of finding your people, of creating spaces where vulnerability and growth are possible. And sometimes, very occasionally, you meet someone who seems ready for their own journey into the extraordinary. You don't give them an invitation. That's not yours to give. And besides, the invitations find people on their own, in their own time. But you plant seeds. You talk about the importance of paying attention, of being open to unusual opportunities, of trusting your instincts when something mysterious calls to you. You've noticed that some of these people years later will come back to you changed in a particular way. They have a familiar look in their eyes, a certain quality to how they move through the world. And you wonder, did they receive an invitation? Did they find their own version of the Ashford estate, their own doorway into transformation? You never ask, just as you hope they'll never ask about yours. Some mysteries are meant to stay mysterious. The continuing dance. Tomorrow night is Saturday, and your invitation arrived 3 days ago. This will be your 15th masquerade, if you've counted correctly. 15 years of walking through those iron gates, 15 years of dancing in that candlelit ballroom, 15 years of discovering new rooms and returning to familiar ones. 15 years of transformation and growth and magic. You've laid out your dress for tomorrow, a new one this year. Deep forest green with silver embroidery that catches the light. You've cleaned your favorite mask, the original one you bought for your first masquerade. It's black lace and feathers, still beautiful after all these years. You've made sure your shoes are comfortable, that you have nothing planned for Sunday, so you can sleep late after returning in the early morning hours. But more than the practical preparations, you've been preparing internally, thinking about what you want to take from this year's masquerade, what questions you're carrying, what parts of yourself you want to explore or transform. You're not the same person you were at your first masquerade, or your fifth, or your 10th. You're someone who's lived through 15 years of growth and change, who's accumulated new experiences and new wisdom. This year, you find yourself thinking about legacy, about what mark you want to leave on the world, what you want to be remembered for, how you want to use whatever years you have left. These aren't morbid thoughts. You're healthy and expect to live many more years. But you're also at an age where these questions feel more urgent, more important to consider seriously. You're hoping the masquerade will give you some insight into these questions, just as it's given you insight into so many other aspects of your life over the years. Maybe you'll have a conversation with someone that shifts your perspective. Maybe you'll find a new room in the house that speaks to exactly what you need to hear. Maybe you'll stand beneath the tree in the maze and see a vision of the years to come, the potential that still exists within your life. Or maybe none of those specific things will happen, but you'll still come away changed in some subtle way, oriented differently, carrying a new understanding or a renewed commitment to living fully. That's the thing about the masquerade. It always gives you what you need, even when you don't know what that is until you receive it. You think about all the other guests who will be there tomorrow night, each one on their own journey, seeking their own transformation. First-timers overwhelmed by the magic of it all. Regulars returning for another dose of wonder. People at crossroads in their lives looking for direction. People who found their direction, celebrating with gratitude. All of you gathering in that liminal space, that place between worlds, that house that exists at the intersection of what is and what could be. The Midnight Masquerade is many things to many people. For some, it's an escape, a brief respite from the difficulties of ordinary life. For others, it's a catalyst, sparking changes that ripple outward through all their days. For still others, it's a reminder, a yearly check-in with the deepest parts of themselves, a chance to make sure they're still on the path they've chosen. For you, it's all of these things and more. It's a home of sorts, not the place where you live, but a place where you belong, where you're understood, where you can be fully yourself. It's a gift that keeps giving, a well that never runs dry, a source of inspiration and renewal that you can return to again and again. And it's a mystery that deepens rather than resolves. After 15 years, you still don't fully understand the masquerade. You don't know who orchestrates it, or how the invitations choose their recipients, or what magic makes it all possible. But you've learned that not knowing is okay, that some things are better left mysterious, that sometimes the questions are more valuable than the answers. Tomorrow night, you'll walk through those iron gates once more. You'll see the lanterns hanging in the trees and the house rising at the end of the driveway. You'll climb the front steps and cross the threshold into that grand entrance hall. You'll accept a glass of champagne and make your way to the ballroom. You'll dance with strangers and wander through corridors and explore gardens in the darkness. You'll lose yourself in the magic and find yourself in the transformation. And when the clock strikes 3, you'll leave, walking back through the gates and through the empty streets to your home. You'll carry with you whatever gifts the night has offered, whatever insights or experiences or connections you've made. You'll integrate them into your life. Let them change you in whatever ways they need to change you. But all that is tomorrow. For now, you sit in your apartment in the fading afternoon light, holding next year's invitation in your hands, feeling that familiar mix of anticipation and gratitude. The masquerade has been such a gift in your life, such a source of growth and joy and meaning. You've been so lucky to find it, or to be found by it. You think about writing something, a letter to your first-time self, perhaps telling her all the things you've learned, assuring her that accepting the invitation was the right choice. Or maybe a letter to the person who sent you the invitation, thanking them for this opportunity, for this gift, for this doorway into transformation. Or maybe just a journal entry, capturing this moment of anticipation before tomorrow night, this space of possibility before the experience begins. But in the end, you decide to simply sit with the feeling, to be present with the gratitude and excitement and readiness you're experiencing. Words can come later. For now, this moment is enough. You and the invitation and the promise of tomorrow night, the promise of another dance in that candlelit ballroom, another walk through those enchanted gardens, another chance to become more fully yourself. Outside your window, the sun is setting, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Soon it will be dark, and the stars will come out, and the moon will rise, dark tonight, in preparation for tomorrow night's dark moon, the perfect moon for a masquerade. You watch the sunset and think about cycles, about how the masquerade returns year after year, just as the seasons return, just as the moon cycles through its phases, just as you yourself return again and again to this experience that has shaped so much of your life. Everything is connected, you realize. The masquerade and your daily life, the magical and the mundane, who you are when masked and who you are when barefaced. They're not separate things, but aspects of a whole, different notes in the same song, different threads in the same tapestry. The masquerade has taught you this over the years, that integration is possible, that you don't have to choose between different parts of yourself, that you can be complex and multifaceted and still whole. As the last light fades from the sky, you stand and move through your apartment, turning on lights, preparing dinner, going about your evening routine. But underneath the ordinary actions, there's a current of anticipation, a sense that time is moving towards something significant. Tomorrow night, the masquerade, another opportunity for magic and transformation and wonder. You sleep deeply that night, dreaming of ballrooms and mazes, of masks and music, of a tree at the heart of a garden whose branches hold all possible futures. And when you wake, you know with absolute certainty that whatever the coming night brings, you're ready for it. You've been preparing for 15 years, after all. You know how to walk between worlds. You know how to let transformation happen. You know how to dance. The day passes in a pleasant blur of preparation and anticipation. You take care of necessary tasks, knowing you'll be in no state to deal with practical matters when you return in the early morning hours. You eat a good meal, knowing you'll need the energy. You rest, conserving your strength for the night ahead. And then, as evening falls and the dark moon rises, you begin your transformation. The bath with its rose-scented oils. The careful application of makeup that emphasizes your eyes behind the mask. The sliding of the forest green dress over your skin. Its weight and softness familiar and comforting. The settling of the black lace mask on your face, its ribbons tied securely at the back of your head. You look in the mirror and see her, the version of yourself who's brave enough to walk through mysterious gates, curious enough to explore enchanted houses, open enough to be transformed by what she finds. She's been a part of you for 15 years now, this masked woman, but she never gets old, never feels tired or routine. Every year, putting on the mask and dress is like putting on magic itself, like stepping into a role that's somehow more authentic than any role you play in ordinary life. You leave your apartment just before 11:30, giving yourself plenty of time to walk to Thornhill Road. The night is cool and clear, perfect for a masquerade. The streets are quiet at this hour, most people already home for the night, unaware of the magic about to unfold in their midst. You see other guests as you walk, all moving in the same direction, all masked and dressed in finery. A man in deep purple with a fox mask. 2 women in silver and gold, their masks decorated with crystals that catch the streetlight. An older couple in matching black, their masks simple but elegant. No one speaks, but there's a companionship in the shared journey, a recognition that you're all part of something special. Thornhill Road appears before you, its cobblestones gleaming slightly in the darkness. You turn onto it and see the iron gates ahead. Open as always, lanterns lighting the way. Your heart beats faster as you approach, not from nervousness, but from excitement, from readiness. You pass through the gates, nodding to the black masked figure that stands beside them, and begin the walk up the driveway. The house comes into view, its windows glowing, music already drifting from within. It looks just as it has every year, imposing and mysterious and welcoming all at once. It looks like home. You climb the front steps, cross the threshold, enter the grand entrance hall with its marble floors and massive chandelier. You accept a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. You take a moment to just stand and breathe, to let the atmosphere of the place settle over you, to remember why you come here, what this night means. Then you move forward toward the ballroom, toward the music and the dancing and the masked strangers who are, in their own way, kindred spirits. You move toward the magic, the transformation, the possibility. You move toward whatever this year's masquerade has to offer, ready to receive it, ready to let it change you in whatever ways you need to be changed. The night stretches ahead of you, full of potential, full of promise. 3 hours until the clock strikes 3. 3 hours of living fully and deeply and magically. 3 hours to dance and explore and discover and become. You step into the ballroom, and the music swells around you and you begin to dance. And the story continues as it has for 15 years, as it will for years to come. Your story, and the story of the midnight masquerade, and the story of all the seekers who found their way through those iron gates into transformation and wonder. All of your stories interweaving, all of you dancing together in that candlelit space where anything is possible and magic is real and the ordinary rules don't apply. This is where you belong. This is what you needed. This is the gift that keeps giving year after year after year. Welcome back to the masquerade. Welcome home.